It's 6:47 in the evening. You haven't done anything particularly hard today. No crisis, no conflict, no major event. And yet, you are completely unreasonably tired. Not sleepy tired. Something heavier than that. The kind of tired where someone asks you what you want for dinner, and you feel something close to despair. You say, "I don't care, you pick," not because you're being easy. Because the idea of making one more decision, even a small, meaningless one, feels like being asked to lift something when your arms have already given out. And the strange part? You don't know why, because nothing happened today. Or so it seems. Let's look at the actual shape of your day. Because something did happen. Many things happened. You just didn't register them as effort. You woke up and decided whether to check your phone immediately or wait. You chose what to wear. Even if it took only seconds, the brain still processed the options. You decided what to eat or whether to eat at all. You read a dozen small messages and made micro-judgments about which ones needed responses and what tone to use in each one. You sat in a meeting and decided when to speak and when to stay quiet. You chose a route. You navigated an unexpected change in plans. You responded to a passive-aggressive comment and chose deliberately not to react the way you wanted to. That last one alone cost more than you realize. By the time evening arrived, you hadn't made a few decisions, you had made hundreds. And the cumulative weight of them is sitting on you right now, like something you can't quite name. Here's how it starts affecting more than just dinner choices. You notice that by afternoon, your threshold for frustration drops. Small things bother you more than they should. A slow internet connection. A slightly passive tone in an email. Someone chewing loudly in the next room. You know these things shouldn't matter. But the emotional regulation that would normally buffer you has been quietly depleted. You also notice something in your thinking. Decisions that require real consideration, the kind that involve your values, your future, your actual life, start to feel impossible. Not because they're complicated, because your brain has nothing left to give them. So you defer them. You say, "I'll think about it tomorrow," and sometimes tomorrow arrives and you still can't think about it. Because tomorrow brings its own hundreds of small decisions that drain the same resource. And in your relationships, this exhaustion makes you feel like someone you don't like. You're short with people you love. You disengage from conversations that deserve your full presence. You say yes to things you mean to say no to because evaluating the decision costs more than just agreeing. And then later, you feel vaguely guilty about all of it, which is itself another cognitive load stacked on top of everything else. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. But that phrase has been used so casually that most people think it just means feeling a bit tired of deciding. The reality is more specific than that. And more important because what's actually happening isn't just mental tiredness. It's the depletion of a specific neurological resource, one that the brain uses for far more than just decisions. And understanding what that resource is will change how you see everything about your day. Before we go into the mechanism, something needs to be said clearly. This is not a productivity problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is not evidence that you're weak or scattered or incapable of handling your own life. It is evidence that you have a brain. Specifically, it's evidence of how the brain was designed in a world that looked very different from the one you're living in. For most of human history, the number of decisions a person made in a day was relatively small. What to eat, where to move, whether a sound in the dark was a threat. The decision-making system evolved for that world. It was never built for a world of 47 unread emails, a streaming service with 10,000 options, a social feed that requires constant micro-judgments, and a workplace that demands sustained cognitive performance for 8 or more hours straight. You are not failing to adapt. You are a well-functioning system operating in conditions it was never designed for. And the exhaustion you feel at the end of the day is not a personal flaw. It's the honest signal of a system that has been asked to do too much with the same finite resources it was always given. The question is not what's wrong with you. The question is, what is the resource? How does it get depleted? And what do you do when you understand that? The resource has a name. Psychologist Roy Baumeister and his colleagues called it ego depletion. The idea is this: self-regulation, the ability to control impulses, make deliberate choices, override automatic reactions, and sustain effortful thinking, draws from a limited cognitive resource. And every act of self-regulation costs a small amount of that resource. Whether it's choosing your breakfast, resisting the urge to snap at someone, focusing your attention on a task you don't feel like doing, or suppressing your real reaction in a social situation, it all draws from the same account. Think of it like battery life. Not the battery on your phone. One you can see the percentage of and plug in whenever you choose. More like an old battery with no indicator. You don't know how much is left. You can't check. You only find out it's nearly gone when things start to malfunction, when your emotional regulation slips, when your thinking becomes foggy, when the smallest decision feels enormous. And here's the part that most people miss. The resource doesn't distinguish between important decisions and unimportant ones. Your brain doesn't charge you less for choosing what to eat for breakfast than it does for deciding whether to send a difficult message. They're both decisions. They both require the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for executive function, to activate, evaluate, and commit. Every time. There's also a second mechanism working alongside this. It's called the default effect. When the decision-making resource runs low, the brain doesn't shut down entirely. Instead, it shifts strategies. It starts defaulting, either to inaction, avoiding the decision entirely, or to impulse, choosing whatever requires the least processing. This is why, at the end of a long cognitive day, you reach for the easy food, the passive entertainment, the path of least resistance. Not because you lack discipline, because your brain has rationally switched to its energy conservation mode. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Here's a mental model that might make this concrete. Imagine your decision-making capacity as a glass of water. Every decision pours out a small amount. Some pour more than others. High-stakes decisions, emotionally loaded ones. Decisions that require overriding your instincts. Some things refill the glass slightly. Rest, reduced stimulation, activities that require no evaluation. The problem is that modern life pours from the glass constantly, from the moment you wake up, often before you've had any chance to refill it. And the deeper the glass gets, the worse the quality of what comes out. Not because you're careless. Because the resource is genuinely finite. There's one more layer worth understanding. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's research on patients with damage to the prefrontal cortex showed something unexpected. These patients could reason. They could discuss options. They understood consequences. But they could not decide. They would spend hours deliberating over trivial choices, because the emotional signal that normally cuts through the noise and tells the brain this one, move on, was absent. What this tells us is that decision-making is not purely rational. It requires an integration of cognition and emotion. And when you're depleted, that integration becomes harder, the signal gets weaker, the noise gets louder. The small decision that should take 5 seconds suddenly feels murky and uncertain. not because it's actually complex. Because the system that resolves complexity quickly is running on almost nothing. What follows is not a productivity system. It's a set of principles, grounded in how the brain actually manages limited resources and how you can work with that reality rather than against it. Front-load your highest decisions, what to do. Identify the 2 or 3 decisions that genuinely matter to you, the ones that align with your values, your direction, your relationships, and make them early. Not after the inbox. Not after the meeting. Before the day has had a chance to drain the glass. Why it works in the brain. The prefrontal cortex is most active and least depleted in the first hours after waking. Cognitive performance research consistently shows that complex, values-based decision-making is sharpest in the morning before decision load accumulates. Roy Baumeister's original ego depletion studies confirmed that performance on self-regulation tasks degrades as the day progresses, not because of time, but because of prior cognitive demand. Real-life example. Before you open any messages, you spend 10 minutes deciding whether to have the conversation you've been deferring. Not having it, just deciding. You write one sentence about what you want to say, then you close the note. You've made the decision while your brain still has capacity for it. Everything else the morning brings doesn't get to drain that account first. Eliminate inconsequential choices deliberately. What to do. Actively reduce the number of low-stakes decisions that repeat across your days. Standardize them. Automate them. Remove the choice entirely. Why it works in the brain. This is the principle behind what researchers call cognitive offloading, transferring the burden of decision from active working memory onto external systems, routines, or environment. When a decision is removed from the daily queue, it no longer draws from the resource. The glass pours out less. The day ends fuller. Real-life example, you stop deciding what to wear each morning. Not because appearance doesn't matter, but because the version of you at 7 a.m. doesn't need to spend cognitive energy on it. You create a loose rotation. You put thought into it once on a Sunday, and then the decision disappears from your daily load. It's a small thing, but multiplied across weeks and months, it is a real return of something finite and valuable. Protect recovery windows. What to do. Build deliberate, non-negotiable periods of low decision rest into the architecture of your day. Not scrolling. Not consuming content that requires judgment. Actual cognitive rest. Walks, silence, repetitive physical tasks. Anything that lets the prefrontal cortex step back. Why it works in the brain. Research by Mary Helen Immerdino-Yang and others. On the brain's default mode network, the system that activates during quiet, undirected rest, shows that this network is not passive. It is doing critical consolidation work. Processing, integrating, restoring. When you deny the brain its recovery windows by filling every gap with stimulation and micro-decisions, you interrupt a process the brain genuinely needs. The depletion that accumulates without rest is not linear. It compounds. Real-life example. You have a 20-minute lunch. Instead of eating while scrolling, you eat without a screen. You don't meditate. You don't journal. You just eat. Look out a window and let the mind wander without direction. That window, unremarkable as it feels, is actively refilling the glass. The afternoon you return to is measurably different because of it. Name the cost of decisions you avoid. What to do. Start recognizing that not deciding is itself a decision that costs cognitive energy. The deferred choice doesn't leave your mental space. It stays there, running in the background, drawing resources continuously. Why it works in the brain. Psychologist Bluma Zygarnik documented. What is now called the Zeigarnik effect, the brain's tendency to keep incomplete tasks in active working memory, generating low-level cognitive interference until they're resolved. Every decision you defer opens a mental loop that doesn't close. And open loops drain the resource just as surely as active decisions do, except more slowly, more invisibly, and often more persistently. Real-life example. You've been avoiding responding to one specific message for 3 days. You haven't thought about it consciously, but some part of your brain has. Every time you open your phone, there's a flicker of it. When you finally respond, even imperfectly, even briefly, something releases. A loop closes. And you realize that the decision was costing you more by waiting than it would have cost to make it. Match decision wait to decision time what to do. Stop trying to make significant decisions in depleted states. When you notice the signs of depletion, irritability, mental fog, the sense that everything feels harder, treat that as information. Delay important decisions until the resource is restored. Make trivial ones quickly and without deliberation. Why it works in the brain. Research on judicial decision-making, including a widely cited study by Schei, Danziger and colleagues, found that judges granted parole at dramatically higher rates at the start of the day and immediately after breaks. By late morning, approval rates had dropped significantly. These were experienced, trained professionals making high-stakes decisions, and their cognitive state still shaped the outcomes. Your decisions are no different. The brain in a depleted state is not less intelligent. It is less able to access the integrative, nuanced processing that important decisions require. Real-life example. A message arrives in the evening asking for a significant commitment, your time, your money, your answer on something that matters. In the past, you might have responded immediately from a place of depletion, saying yes when you meant maybe, or no when you meant I need to think. Now you notice the depletion. You reply, I'll get back to you tomorrow morning, and in the morning, with the glass refilled, the decision is clearer, easier, more aligned with who you actually are. Here's the model to carry with you. Your decision-making capacity is a glass of water. It starts each day with a certain level, variable, depending on rest and recovery. Every decision pours some out. Every unresolved loop pours some out quietly in the background. Every act of emotional suppression, impulse control, or sustained focus pours some out. And nothing refills it except genuine rest. Time when the brain is not being asked to evaluate, judge, or choose. The exhaustion you feel by evening is not vague or mysterious. It's the glass running low. And the short-temperedness, the poor choices, the inability to care about dinner, those are not character failures. They are the honest, predictable behavior of a system working correctly with diminished resources. The goal is not to have more willpower. The goal is to pour less out unnecessarily and to refill more deliberately, to front-load what matters, to automate what doesn't, to close loops before they drain you invisibly, to rest without apology, to match the weight of decisions to the state of the resource that makes them. That's not a productivity strategy. That's working with your brain instead of continually against it. There's a specific kind of guilt that comes with decision fatigue. The guilt of knowing you snapped at someone over something small. The guilt of choosing the easy thing again when you meant to choose the meaningful thing. The guilt of feeling so depleted by a day that didn't look, from the outside, like anything particularly hard. And underneath that guilt is often an assumption that if you were more disciplined, more focused, more together, this wouldn't happen. That the tiredness is evidence of something being wrong with you. But you've seen the mechanism now. You've seen that the brain is running a system with finite resources, that it was never designed for the volume of choices modern life produces, that the depletion is real, measurable, predictable, and impersonal. It doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're human. And you've been spending your humanity on things that quietly cost more than you knew. The question to sit with is not, why can't I handle this? The question is, what am I pouring my capacity into, and is it worth what it costs? Because you do have a glass. And you get to have some say in what it gets poured into. Not complete control. The world will always make demands. But more say than you've been allowing yourself. Start there. Not with a new system. Not with a schedule or a habit tracker. Just with the recognition that your capacity is real, that it's finite, and that it deserves to be spent on what actually matters to you. That's not a small thing. For most people, it takes a very long time to learn it. You're learning it now.